A hardened Marine, haunted by war and loneliness, never expected his life to change on a dusty roadside. But when he saw 3 orphaned kids with nowhere to go, he did the unthinkable. He bought them, and then one of them whispered a name that shattered his world. What happened next? This is a story of redemption, family, and the unbreakable bond that form in the most unexpected places. Before we dive into this incredible journey, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us of the power of second chances. Help us share more by supporting our channel. The Roadside Encounter. The sun hung low in the Texas sky, a burning orange disk smeared with streaks of dusty pink. Sergeant Jake Malone, known as Reaper to his old unit, drove with the windows down, letting the dry, scorching air whip to the cab of his pickup truck. It didn't cool him. Nothing did. Not since he'd come back. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty, just like the last 3 years of his life. 2 tours in Afghanistan, one in Iraq, a Purple Heart, and a medical discharge later. Jake had nothing to show for it but a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his glove compartment and a trailer that didn't feel like home. He wasn't even sure why he was driving this stretch of highway. Maybe because it was the opposite direction of the VA hospital, where they kept asking him questions he didn't want to answer. Maybe because if he drove far enough, he could pretend, just for a few hours, that the war was behind him. Then he saw them. 3 figures crouched near a gas station, their shadows long and thin in the late afternoon light. At first, he thought they were just more debris, torn plastic bags, maybe, or discarded clothes caught on the barbed wire fence. But then one of them moved. Jake's fingers tightened on the wheel. His foot hovered over brake. Keep driving. That's what he should do. He wasn't charity case. He wasn't some do-gooder. He was a man who barely kept his own head above water. But something made him slow down. The oldest was a boy, maybe 10, with dirt smeared across his face and a too big T-shirt hanging off his bony shoulders. He held a piece of cardboard with shaky handwriting. Food or work? Please. Behind him, 2 smaller kids, a girl with tangled brown hair and a little boy who couldn't have been more than 5, huddled together under a faded blanket. Jake's stomach twisted. He pulled over. The boy's eyes flicked up, wary, like a stray dog expecting a kick. The girl clutched the little boy tighter. Jake killed the engine and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. The heat hit him like a wall. You selling something? His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. The boy swallowed hard. Will work, he said, voice thin but steady. Clean, cook, anything. Jake studied them. The girl's shoes were falling apart. The little boy's knees were scraped raw. They weren't just hungry, they were lost. Then the smallest one, the boy, peeked out from behind the girl's arm. His big eyes locked onto Jake's face. And he whispered, "You look like my dad." The words hit Jake like a punch to the ribs. He crouched down, ignoring the ache in his bad knee. "What's your name, kid?" The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Eli." "Eli what?" The boy glanced at the older kids, then back at Jake. "Eli Malone." Jake's breath stopped. Malone, his brother's last name. His brother, who had bled out in his arms in a dusty alley in Kabul. His brother, who had gasped out one last request before the light left his eyes. "Find my boy." Jake had tried. For months he'd searched, but David's ex-wife had vanished, and with her, Eli. The trail had gone cold, and Jake had drowned the guilt in whiskey and silence. And now here he was, staring into a child's face that carried his brother's eyes. His hands shook. If this was really Eli, where was his sister-in-law? Where had these kids come from? And why were they alone on the side of a highway? The oldest boy, Lucas, he'd learn later, stepped forward, shoulders squared like he was ready to fight. "We don't want trouble," he said. "Just help." Jake looked at them, 3 kids with nowhere to go, and made a decision. He reached for his wallet, and that's when he noticed a man inside the gas station, watching them through the glass. Watching Eli, the broken promise. Jake's fingers closed around his wallet, but his eyes stayed locked on the man inside the gas station. The guy was leaning against the counter, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his gaze sharp and calculating. He wasn't just watching, he was studying them. A cold prickle ran down Jake's spine. He forced himself to look away, focusing back on the kids. Lucas was still standing protectively in front of Mia, and Eli, his jaw set like he was ready to bolt if Jake made one wrong move. Smart kid. Jake pulled out a few bills, more than he should have given, but he didn't care. "Here," he said, holding them out. "Get yourself some food." Lucas hesitated, then snatched the money like he expected Jake to change his mind. "Thanks," he muttered, stuffing it into his pocket. Jake nodded toward the gas station. "That guy in there, does he know you?" Lucas stiffened. Mia's grip on Eli tightened. That was answer enough. Jake exhaled slowly, weighing his options. He could walk away. He should walk away. He wasn't equipped for this. Wasn't some hero who fixed broken things. He was just a broken thing himself. But then Eli spoke again, so quiet Jake almost missed it. "Uncle Jake." The name hit him like a bullet. He hadn't told him his name. His throat tightened. "You remember me?" Eli nodded, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Daddy showed me pictures. He said you were brave." Jake's chest ached. David had kept photos of him, had told his son stories, and Jake had failed them both. He crouched down again, ignoring the pain in his knee. "Eli, where's your mom?" The boy's lower lip trembled. "She went away." "Went away where?" Mia cut in, her voice fierce. "She didn't go anywhere. She left." Jake glanced at Lucas, who just shook his head, his expression dark. Something was very wrong here. He made a decision. "Get in the truck," he said. Lucas's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because that guy's coming out here, and I don't think he's bringing candy." Sure enough, the man from inside had stubbed out his cigarette and was heading toward them, his boots kicking up dust. Lucas didn't hesitate. He grabbed Mia and Eli and yanked them toward the truck. Jake didn't wait for them to buckle in. He just turned the key and hit the gas, his tires spitting gravel as they pulled onto the highway. In the rear-view mirror, the man stood in the middle of the road, watching them go. Jake's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Who was that?" he asked. Lucas was silent for a long moment. Then, "His name's Ray. He's bad news." "How bad?" "He's the reason we're out here." Jake glanced at the kids in the mirror. Mia was clutching Eli like she was afraid he'd disappear. Eli was staring at Jake with those big, trusting eyes that looked so much like David's at hurt. He should take them to the cops. Should let the system handle this. But the system had already failed him once, and Jake had made a promise. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "All right," he said, "start talking." And Lucas did. The story came out in pieces. A mom who got mixed up with the wrong people, a house that wasn't safe, a night when they'd run and never look back. By the time Lucas finished, Jake's jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. He'd thought he was just picking up a few stray kids. Turns out, he was stealing someone's property. And Ray wasn't the kind of man who let things go. The weight of shadows. The truck's engine hummed steadily as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep oranges. Jake kept his eyes on the road, but his mind raced faster than the tires on asphalt. In the back seat, Eli had fallen asleep against Mia's shoulder, his small fingers still clutching the frayed edge of his blanket. Lucas sat stiffly beside them, his gaze flicking between the passing road signs and Jake's reflection in the rearview mirror. The boy hadn't relaxed since they had left the gas station, like he expected Jake to turn the truck around any second. Jake couldn't blame him. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the scars along his knuckles stretching taut. "You been on the road long?" he asked, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Eli. Lucas hesitated before answering. 3 weeks. Maybe 4. Christ. Jake exhaled through his nose. 3 weeks of sleeping in ditches and begging for food. 3 weeks of running. And before that, with Mom. Lucas's voice went flat. Until she handed us over to Ray. Jake's stomach twisted. He'd seen enough in the war to know what that meant. Knew what kind of men like Ray did with desperate women and unwanted kids. The truck's cab felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Jake rolled down his window another inch, letting the rush of wind fill the silence. Mia spoke up for the first time since they'd left, her voice barely above a whisper. She said it was just for a little while, that she'd come back. Jake glanced at her in the mirror. The streetlights flickering past illuminated the tear tracks cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. He knew better than to make promises he couldn't keep, so instead he asked, "You hungry?" 20 minutes later, they pulled into the cracked parking lot of a roadside diner, the kind of place with flickering neon and sticky vinyl booths. The kind of place people went when they didn't want to be noticed. Jake killed the engine and turned to face them. "Stay close. Don't talk to anyone." The diner was nearly empty, just a tired-looking waitress and a trucker nursing coffee at the counter. Jake herded the kids into a corner booth, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the parking lot. Lucas eyed the menu like it was written in another language. "Order whatever you want," Jake said, sliding a laminated page toward Mia. She stared at it, then up at him. "Really?" "Yeah, really." When the waitress came, the kids ordered like they were afraid the words would cost money. Pancakes for Eli, a burger for Lucas, grilled cheese for Mia. Jake added coffee for himself, black as the night outside. As they waited for the food, Lucas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not going to turn us in, are you?" Jake met his gaze. "You think that's what this is?" "I think grown-ups don't do things for free." The words hit harder than they should have. Jake took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the bitterness ground him. "I knew Eli's dad. We were family." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "So what? That doesn't mean..." "Means I'm not letting anything happen to him," Jake interrupted. "Or you too." The food arrived then, steaming plates that momentarily silenced all conversation. Eli woke up just in time to shove a forkful of pancake into his mouth with a hum of delight. Mia ate like she was afraid someone would take it away. Quick, efficient bites between wary glances at the door. Jake watched them, an unfamiliar ache settling behind his ribs. He was halfway through his coffee when the bell above the diner door jingled. Jake's hand stilled. Ray stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room like a predator picking out prey. The devil at the door. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets as Ray's shadow stretched across the checkered floor. Jake didn't move, didn't blink, just let his fingers inch toward the steak knife beside his plate. Eli, oblivious, was busy drowning his pancakes in syrup. Mia froze mid-bite, her wide eyes locked on the newcomer. Lucas's legs started bouncing under the table, his entire body coiled tight, like a spring. Ray's gaze swept past the trucker at the counter before landing on their booth. A slow, yellowed grin split his face. "Well, ain't this cozy," he drawled, taking a step forward. His boots left dusty prints on the linoleum. Jake shifted just enough to block Eli from view. "You lost, friend." Ray barked out a laugh. "Friend? Oh, that's rich." He hooked his thumbs through his belt loops, close enough now that Jake could smell the stale tobacco and sweat clinging to him. "See, I'm just here collecting what's mine." The waitress chose that moment to approach, her smile strained. "Can I get you something, hon?" Ray didn't even glance at her. "Coffee. Black." When she hesitated, he snapped his fingers. "Now." Jake watched her scurry away before turning back to Ray. His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "These kids ain't property." Ray's grin turned nasty. He leaned in, his breath reeking of whiskey and rot. "Their mama signed him over fair and square. Got papers and everything." His eyes flicked to Eli. "Even that one, after his junkie whore of a mom." Jake moved faster than anyone expected for a man his size. The steak knife pressed against Ray's throat before the bastard could finish his sentence. The diner's background noise, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the soda machine, faded into white noise. "I'm only going to say this once," Jake murmured, his voice colder than a winter grave. "Walk out that door. Never come near them again." Ray's Adam's apple bobbed against the blade. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his bloodshot eyes. Then Eli piped up from behind Jake. "Uncle Jake." Ray's expression twisted into something ugly. "Oh, this just got interesting." The waitress gasped as she returned with the coffee, her tray rattling. The trucker at the counter finally looked up from his newspaper. Jake didn't remove the knife. Kids. Truck. Now. Lucas didn't need telling twice. He yanked Mia and Eli out of the booth, shielding them with his body as they bolted for the door. Ray made a grab for them. Bad mistake. Jake's fist connected with his jaw with a satisfying crack. Ray staggered back into a dessert cart, sending pies crashing to the floor in splatters of red cherry filling that looked disturbingly like blood. "Call the cops!" the waitress shrieked. Jake threw a 20 on the table and was out the door before Ray could pick himself up. The kids were already in the truck, Lucas clutching Eli like a lifeline. Tires screeched as Jake peeled out of the parking lot. In the rear-view mirror, Ray stumbled out of the diner, one hand clutching his bleeding mouth, the other pointing after them in silent promise. Mia was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "He's going to come after us." Jake's fingers tightened on the wheel. "Let him try." Lucas leaned forward, his breath coming fast. "You don't understand. Ray's connected. He's got cops in his pocket, judges." "Then we disappear," Jake interrupted. Silence filled the cab. Even Eli seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, his syrup-sticky fingers clutching Jake's sleeve. The Marine turned onto a back road, the headlights cutting through the gathering dark. Somewhere out there was a safe place. Somewhere Ray wouldn't find them. He just had to remember how to be the Reaper one last time. Blood and promises. The truck's headlights carved a narrow path through the back roads as Jake pushed the engine harder. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:37 p.m. Too late for traffic, too early for safety. Every set of headlights in the rear view made his shoulders tense. Lucas had stopped talking 20 miles back. Now he just stared out the window, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm against his knee. Mia had curled into herself, her arms wrapped tight around her middle. Only Eli slept, his head lolling against the seatbelt, oblivious of the danger chasing him through the night. Jake took a sharp left onto an unmarked dirt road, the truck bouncing over ruts and dried mud. Branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. "Where are we going?" Mia whispered. "Somewhere safe," Jake said. It wasn't quite a lie. The hunting cabin belonged to an old buddy from his unit, a place off-grid, no records, paid for in cash years ago. If Ray had cops in his pocket, they wouldn't find this place in any database. The road worsened until they were crawling forward at walking pace. A deer darted across their path, eyes glowing in the headlights before vanishing into the black. Lucas finally spoke. "You hit him." Jake kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah. You know he's going to kill you for that, right?" The words hung in the air between them. Not a question. A fact. Jake's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let him try." The cabin appeared suddenly, a dark shape against darker trees. Jake killed the lights before pulling up to the sagging porch. The place looked abandoned, just like he'd hoped. Getting the kids inside was quick work. Lucas carried a half-asleep Eli while Mia clung to Jake's sleeve, her nails digging into his arm every time an owl hooted or a branch cracked. The front door groaned in protest when Jake shouldered it open, releasing a puff of stale air and dust. The inside wasn't much. A single room with a wood stove, 2 cots, and a table that had seen better days. But the locks were solid, and the windows were small enough that no grown man could squeeze through. Jake set to work immediately. He lit the oil lamp on the table, its flickering light casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. The wood stove took longer, his fingers fumbling with damp matches, until a weak flame finally caught. Mia hovered near the heat, rubbing her arms. "How long are we staying here?" "Long enough to figure things out." Jake straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Lucas, check the cabinets for food." "Mia, there should be blankets in that trunk." They moved like soldiers following orders, quick, efficient, no complaints. Jake watched them for a moment before stepping outside under the guise of checking the perimeter. The night air was sharp with the scent of pine and impending rain. Jake braced his hands against the porch railing, his breath coming out in white puffs. He'd been stupid back at the diner, reckless. That knife at Ray's throat should have been in his ribs. A floorboard creaked behind him. "You gonna run?" Jake turned to find Lucas standing in the doorway, his thin frame silhouetted by the lamplight. "No." "Then what's the plan?" Lucas stepped forward, his voice dropping. Because Ray's not just some guy. He moves kids. Like, moves them. And now he's pissed. The words settled between them like a stone in water. Jake had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach turn. I need to know if Eli's really my nephew, Jake said finally. If he is what? Jake met the boy's gaze. Then I made a promise. Inside, Eli stirred on one of the cots, his sleepy voice carrying to the open door. Uncle Jake. The way he said it, so trusting, so sure, lodged something sharp in Jake's chest. Lucas studied him for a long moment before nodding toward the cabin. Better come inside. We'll need to bar the door. As Jake followed him in, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the roof like impatient fingers. Somewhere out there, Ray was hunting, and Jake had just become the prey. Ghost in the rain. The storm arrived like an unwelcome guest. First a whisper of rain on the roof, then a howling deluge that shook the cabin's old bones. Jake sat at the rickety table, cleaning his service pistol by lamplight. The methodical motions, disassembling, wiping, reassembling, were as familiar as breathing. Across the room, Eli slept fitfully on one cot, while Mia curled protectively around him. Lucas perched on the edge of the other cot, sharpening a hunting knife he'd found in the trunk with long, deliberate strokes. The scrape of steel on stone filled the silence between thunderclaps. Jake glanced at the boy's hands. Steady, practiced. You've done that before. Lucas didn't look up. Had to. The unspoken stories in those two words hung heavy in the air. Jake knew that kind of childhood. The kind that forced calluses on your soul before you lost your baby teeth. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows. Mia whimpered in her sleep. Jake set the reassembled pistol down with a quiet click. We'll need supplies tomorrow. Food that won't spoil. Medicine. Lucas tested the knife's edge against his thumb. And how you going to pay for that? Last I saw, you threw your cash at the diner like some hero in a movie. The observation stung because it was true. Jake's wallet held exactly $17 and a maxed-out credit card. His bank account had been bleeding dry since the VA cut his disability claim. I'll figure it out, Jake muttered. Lucas snorted. Yeah, like you figured out Ray? The lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Jake studied the boy's face, the defiance of his jaw, the dark circles under his eyes. Lucas wasn't just scared. He was angry. Angry at the world, at Ray, at Jake for dragging him into this mess. Jake couldn't blame him. A sudden thump outside sent them both reaching for weapons. Lucas was on his feet before Jake could stop him, knife raised, staring at the door like he could see through solid wood. The thump came again, softer this time, then a pitiful mewling. Jake motioned Lucas back and approached the door, pistol raised. Through the warped wood, he heard the sound again, not a threat, a plea. He cracked the door open to a sodden surprise. A skinny gray cat stood on the porch, its fur plastered to its body, one ear torn from old fights. It blinked up at Jake with golden eyes before darting between his legs into the cabin. Lucas lowered his knife. You gotta be kidding me. The cat shook itself violently, spraying rainwater everywhere before making a beeline for the wood stove. It circled twice before collapsing in front of the dying embers with a dramatic sigh. Mia stirred at the noise, rubbing her eyes. When she saw the cat, her face lit up for the first time since Jake had met her. You found us a friend. Jake watched as the girl scrambled from the cot to kneel beside the stray. The cat tolerated her tentative strokes with regal indifference. Lucas rolled his eyes. Great. Now we're running a damn zoo. But Jake noticed the way the boy's shoulders relaxed slightly, the knife no longer white-knuckled in his grip. The cat's unexpected arrival had broken the tension like a spell. As Mia whispered nonsense to their new guest, Jake caught Lucas's eye and nodded toward the trunk in the corner. Check for cans. Cats eat tuna, right? Lucas muttered something unflattering under his breath, but moved to search the supplies anyway. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time since they fled the diner, something like fragile peace settled over the cabin. The cat purred like a motorboat as Mia scratched behind its good ear. "I'm going to call you Sergeant," she announced. Jake's lips twitched. "Why Sergeant?" "Because he's brave. Like you." The simple faith in her words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. He looked away before she could see the emotion in his eyes. Lucas tossed a dennikin of tuna at Jake's chest. "Here, dinner for our new squad member." As Jake peeled open the can, the cat's ears perked up. Its golden eyes tracked his every movement with military precision. Jake huffed a quiet laugh. "Yeah, Sergeant suited it just fine." Somewhere beyond these walls, Ray was still hunting. The storm still howled. The world remained cruel and unforgiving. But tonight, in this drafty cabin with 2 stolen kids and a battle-scarred cat, Jake Malone allowed himself to hope. The breaking point. Dawn came gray and reluctant, the storm having washed the world in a dull, lifeless light. Jake stood watch at the window, his palms pressed against the cold glass. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every creak of the old cabin, every moan of the wind had set his nerves on edge. Sergeant the cat stretched at his feet, tail twitching as it watched the tree line with predator's focus. Even the strays seemed to sense the danger lurking beyond their fragile sanctuary. Behind him, the rustle of blankets signaled Lucas was awake. The boy moved quietly, too quietly for someone his age, coming to stand beside Jake at the window. "You see something?" Lucas whispered. Jake shook his head. "Not yet." Lucas chewed his bottom lip, a nervous habit Jake had noticed. "We can't stay here forever." "I know." The truth hung between them, ugly and unavoidable. The cabin was a temporary reprieve, not a solution. They had no food, no transportation besides a truck, and no way to know how far Ray's reach extended. A soft sound from the cots drew their attention. Mia sat up, her hair sticking out in wild tufts, Eli still curled against her side. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks hollow. She looked older than her years, worn down by too much running. "I'm hungry," Eli announced to no one in particular, his voice too loud in the tense quiet. Jake forced himself to move, to act like he had some semblance of control. "Let's see what we got." The supplies were grim. 2 cans of beans, a half-empty bag of rice, and the remaining tuna Sergeant had generously left uneaten. Jake's stomach growled just looking at it. Lucas picked up the rice bag, weighing it in his hand like he could measure their survival chances by the heft of it. "There's a town about 5 miles east. I saw the sign last night." Jake's jaw tightened. "Too risky. So we just sit here and starve?" Lucas's voice cracked, the first real emotion breaking through his carefully constructed armor. "You don't know what Ray does to kids he catches running, especially ones who make him look stupid in front of people." Mia flinched, pulling Eli closer. The movement sent a fresh wave of anger through Jake's veins. "I'll go," Jake said. "Alone." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but Jake cut him off with a look. "You're staying with them. Keep the gun." He nodded to the pistol on the table. "You're just going to walk into town with your face all over Ray's contacts." Lucas's laugh was bitter. Real smart plan, Marine. Jake ignored the jab, rummaging through the cabin's sparse belongings until he found what he needed. An old baseball cap and a faded flannel shirt that smelled of mothballs. It wasn't much of a disguise, but it would have to do. He changed quickly, aware of 3 sets of eyes watching his every move. When he tucked his dog tags into his shirt, Eli's small voice piped up. "You gonna come back?" The question, so simple and so loaded, stopped Jake mid-motion. He turned to find Eli watching with those 2 knowing eyes, David's eyes. Jake crouched in front of the cot. "I made a promise, remember?" Eli considered this gravely before nodding. "Okay." Mia wasn't so easily convinced. She grabbed Jake's wrist as he stood, her fingers surprisingly strong. "If you're not back by dark, we're leaving." Jake met her gaze, seeing the steel beneath the fear. "Fair enough." Lucas walked him to the door, the pistol awkward in his grip. "You know this is a bad idea, right?" Jake adjusted the cap, pulling the brim low over his eyes. "Worst one I've had in years." The woods were eerily quiet as Jake stepped outside, the only sound the squelch of mud beneath his boots. The storm had left the ground sodden, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. He'd gone maybe 50 yards when a flash of movement caught his eye, a glint of metal between the trees. Jake froze, instinct screaming. The barrel of a rifle emerged first, then the man holding it. Not Ray. Someone worse. Sheriff's deputy badges gleamed on the man's chest as he stepped onto the path. His smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Well now," he drawled, finger resting too casually on the trigger. "Aren't you just the man everyone's looking for?" Behind him, two more figures materialized from the trees. Jake's blood turned to ice. They'd been found, between the devil and the deep blue sea. The deputy's grin widened as he took a step closer, his boots sinking into the mud. The rifle never wavered, its barrel staring unblinking at Jake's chest. Behind him, the other two men fanned out, one circling left, the other right, trapping him. Jake kept his hands visible, his voice calm. "You got the wrong guy." The deputy snorted. "Jake Malone. Dishonorable discharge. Wanted for questioning in an assault back at Millersville." He tilted his head, studying Jake like a bug under glass. "And now kidnapping? You're having a real bad week, ain't you?" Kidnapping. The word hit like a sucker punch. Ray had gotten the cops first, spun his own version of events. Of course he had. Jake forced himself to breathe, to think. The cabin was hidden but not invisible. If these men had found him, how long before they found the kids? The deputy took another step forward. Were they Malone? The kids Ray Denton reported missing. So that was Ray's play. Report them as kidnapped to get law enforcement on his side. Clever bastard. Jake kept his body positioned between the deputies and the cabin's general direction. Last I checked, foster kids running from abuse ain't kidnapping. The man on Jake's left, a pockmarked deputy with nicotine-stained fingers, spat into the mud. Ain't your call to make. The third man, younger with a nervous tick in his right eye, kept glancing at the trees. We should call this in Sarge. The lead deputy, Sarge, ignored him. "You know how this ends, Malone. Either you walk out of these woods with us, or we carry you out." His finger teased the trigger. "Your choice." A drop of sweat trickled down Jake's spine. He calculated distances, angles. 3 against 1, all armed. Even at his best, those were suicide odds. Then the forest erupted in noise. A yowling streak of gray launched itself from the underbrush straight at the young deputy's face. Sergeant DeCat became a whirlwind of claws and fury, shredding the man's cheeks as he screamed and batted at the animal. In the chaos, Jake moved. He lunged left, driving his shoulder into Pockmark's gut. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the deputy's pistol discharging harmlessly into the air. Jake's fist connected with the man's jaw once, twice. Then he was rolling away as Sarge's rifle barked, splintering a tree trunk where Jake's head had been. Jake scrambled behind a thick oak, his breath sawing in his lungs. Gunshots. That changed everything. "Malone!" Sarge bellowed. "You're dead, you hear me? Dead." Another shot kicked up dirt near Jake's foot. He peered around the tree, assessing. The young deputy was still wrestling with Sargent, blood running down his face. Pockmark was groaning on the ground, clutching his jaw. Sarge was reloading. A shrill whistle cut through the woods. Jake's head snapped toward the sound. There, barely visible through the trees, Lucas crouched behind a fallen log, gesturing wildly. "Go." Jake hesitated. If he ran, they'd follow. Straight to the cabin. Straight to the kids. But Lucas was pointing emphatically behind him toward a different path, a diversion. Jake's stomach twisted. The boy was giving him an out, a chance to escape alone. Another rifle shot decided for him. The bullet grazed Jake's arm, burning like fire. He sucked in a breath and ran, not toward Lucas, but parallel to cabin, leading the deputies away. Branches whipped at his face as he crashed through the underbrush. Behind him, shouts and pounding footsteps signaled pursuit. His arm throbbed, blood soaking through his sleeve. The whistle came again, this time from ahead. Jake skidded to a stop as Mia materialized from behind a tree, her small face set in grim determination. She grabbed his uninjured arm and yanked him off the path. "This way." They zigzagged through dense brush, Mia moving with the certainty of someone who'd spent too much time running. When Jake risked a glance back, He saw no sign of pursuit, just a distant echo of shouted curses. Mia pulled him down into a shallow gully choked with ferns. Lucas took Eli the other way. They're meeting us at the creek. Jake pressed a hand to his bleeding arm. The cat? A ghost of a smile touched Mia's lips. Sergeant's fine. That deputy won't be. They waited in silence, listening as the search moved farther away. After what felt like hours, but was likely minutes, Mia tapped Jake's shoulder and pointed. Lucas emerged from the trees, Eli clinging to his back. The boy's face was pale but set, his grip on the pistol white-knuckled. When he saw Jake, his shoulders slumped in relief. Eli wriggled down and launched himself at Jake, burying his face in Jake's shirt. You came back. Jake hugged him with his good arm, meeting Lucas's gaze over the boy's head. The unspoken question hung between them. What now? Lucas nodded toward the fading shouts in the distance. They'll call for backup. More cops. Dogs, maybe. Jake took a shaky breath. The cabin was compromised. The truck was compromised. They had no supplies, no safe place. And then Mia, ever practical, reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of keys Jake recognized. The truck keys. Lucas grinned, sharp and feral. Figured you might need these. Jake stared at them, then at the kids, scrappy, brave, and far too used to surviving. He pocketed the keys with a grim smile. Let's go. The river's edge. The creek burbled quietly in the pre-dawn light, its waters swollen from the storm. Jake knelt at the bank, rinsing blood from his torn sleeve. The bullet had only grazed him, but the wound burned like hellfire. Behind him, Lucas kept watch, the pistol heavy in his hands. Eli crouched beside Jake, his small fingers clumsily trying to help clean the wound. Does it hurt? Not much, Jake lied. Mia appeared suddenly from the trees, her arms full of damp moss. For bandages, she said, kneeling beside them. Her movements were efficient, too practiced for a child. Jake wondered how many times she'd done this before. As Mia packed the moss against the wound, Lucas spoke without turning around. Truck's about half a mile west. They'll have eyes on it by now. Jake nodded, wincing as Mia tightened a strip of torn flannel around his arm. Then we go on foot. To where? Lucas finally turned, his face shadowed in the dim light. They've got our descriptions. Cops, Ray. Hell, probably half the county by now. Jake studied the kids, Mia's determined frown, Eli's wide, trusting eyes, Lucas's barely contained panic. They were exhausted, hungry, and running out of options. And it was his fault. A rustle in the underbrush sent them all freezing. Lucas raised a pistol, his hand steady despite the tremor in his breath. Sergeant DeCat emerged, his fur matted with leaves but otherwise unharmed. He trotted straight to Eli, rubbing against the boy's legs with satisfied purr. Mia exhaled shakily. Just the sergeant reporting for duty. The tension broke like a snapped wire. Eli giggled, scratching behind the cat's torn ear. Even Lucas's mouth twitched towards something resembling a smile. Jake used the moment to think. They needed shelter, supplies, a way out of the county unseen. An idea formed, dangerous but possible. There's a place, Jake said slowly. An old friend from the Corps, lives off-grid near the state line. Lucas's eyes narrowed. How far? 2 days walking. Maybe 3 at our pace. Mia chewed her lip. What if he turns us in? Jake met her gaze. He won't. Because Corporal Daniel Doc Henderson owed him for Ramadi, for the ambush, for the bullet Jake had taken that was meant for Doc's spine. Some debts didn't fade with time. Lucas studied Jake's face, then nodded once. Which way? Jake pointed northwest, toward the faintest blush of dawn. We followed the creek to the river, crossed at the shallows. They moved quietly, single file, Lucas leading with the pistol, Mia guiding Eli, Jake bringing up the rear with Sergeant weaving between his feet. The forest thickened as they walked, the canopy closing overhead like a protective shield. By midday, the creek joined a wider river, its banks lined with smooth stones. They rested there, sharing the last of the beans Mia had stuffed in her pockets before fleeing the cabin. Eli sat cross-legged in the shallows, giggling as Sergeant batted at minnows. Watching them, something fragile and unfamiliar tugged at Jake's chest. Mia settled beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You really think we can make it?" Jake studied the horizon, the endless stretch of wilderness between them and safety. "We have to." A branch snapped upstream. Lucas was on his feet instantly, pistol raised. Jake shoved the younger kids behind him. Scanning the tree line, a figure emerged from the brush, tall, lean, with a familiar hitch in his step. Doc Henderson lowered his shotgun, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Reap 'em alone." Jake's breath left him in a rush. "Document." Doc's gaze flicked to the kids, to the pistol in Lucas's hands, to Jake's bloodied arm. His smile faded. "You're in deep shit, brother." Jake exhaled. "You have no idea." Doc nodded toward the trees. "My truck's a click north. Let's get you all someplace safe." As they followed Doc into the woods, Jake felt the first flicker of hope since this nightmare began. It lasted exactly 37 steps. The distant wail of sirens cut through the trees. The calm before. The sirens warbled in the distance, fading in and out like a bad radio signal. Doc didn't hesitate. He grabbed Eli's hand and picked up the pace, his boots crunching over dead leaves as he led them deeper into the trees. "Keep close," Doc muttered over his shoulder. "And for God's sake, put the safety on that pistol, kid." Lucas fumbled with the gun, his fingers shaking slightly before he managed to click the safety into place. Jake kept a hand on Mia's shoulder, steering her through the underbrush. His arm throbbed with every step, but the pain was distant, secondary to the adrenaline humming through his veins. The forest thickened, the canopy above blocking out most of the afternoon sun. Sergeant the cat darted ahead, his gray tail flicking like a metronome, keeping time with their frantic escape. After what felt like miles but was likely only 20 minutes of hard walking, Doc slowed near a cluster of boulders. He pushed aside a tangle of vines to reveal a narrow path. Almost there. The path opened abruptly into a clearing where an old Ford pickup sat beneath a camouflage tarp, its tires caked with mud. Beyond it stood a small cabin, its wooden walls weathered gray by years of storms. Doc didn't stop to admire the view. He marched straight to the truck, yanked open the passenger door, and pulled out a rusted first aid kit. Inside, now. The cabin smelled of pine resin and gun oil. A single lantern cast flickering light over a scarred wooden table, a cast-iron stove, and two cots pushed against opposite walls. Maps and newspaper clippings covered one wall, connected by a spiderweb of red string. Doc tossed a first aid kit at Jake. "Fix yourself up. Kids, food's in the cupboard. Eat something before you pass out." Mia didn't need telling twice. She dragged Eli to the small kitchen area and started rummaging through cans. Lucas lingered near the door, his eyes darting between the maps and the windows. Doc noticed. "Relax, kid. Ain't nobody finding this place, unless I want 'em to." Jake peeled back his makeshift bandage, wincing as the fabric stuck to the wound. "You set up traps?" Doc grinned, showing off a missing canine. "Let's just say any uninvited guests will regret their life choices." As Jake cleaned his arm, Eli wandered over with a can of peaches, his mouth already sticky with syrup. "Mr. Doc, you got a cat?" Doc raised an eyebrow at Sergeant, who was currently rubbing against his boots. "Looks like I do now." The tension in the room eased slightly. Lucas finally lowered the pistol onto the table and collapsed into a chair. His hands were shaking. Doc studied him for a long moment before grabbing a bottle of whiskey from a shelf. He poured a generous amount into a tin cup and slid it toward Lucas. "Drink. Slowly." Lucas eyed the amber liquid, then down half in one gulp. He coughed violently, his eyes watering. Doc chuckled. "Or that works too." Night fell outside, the cabin growing darker until Doc lit a second lantern. The kids ate in silence, peaches, crackers, and some questionable-looking jerky that Eli declared the best thing ever. Jake finished bandaging his arm and joined Doc at the map-covered wall. "How bad is it out there?" Doc tapped a newspaper clipping, a grainy photo of Jake's face under the headline, "Marine wanted in kidnapping case." "Real bad. Cops got your picture everywhere. That slimeball Ray's got half the county, convinced you're some kind of child-snatching boogeyman. Jake's jaw tightened. And the other half? The other half knows Ray's full of shit, but ain't stupid enough to say so. Doc glanced at the kids, lowering his voice. They his? No. Jake hesitated. Well, maybe one of M. Doc didn't press. He just nodded toward the maps. State lines 20 miles north. I can get you there, but not with every cop in 3 counties looking. We need time. Doc rubbed his chin, the stubble making a sandpaper sound. Got an idea, but you ain't gonna like it. Before he could explain, a high-pitched beep cut through the cabin. Doc yanked a handheld radio from his belt, his face going grim. Motion sensor. East perimeter. Lucas was on his feet instantly, the whiskey forgotten. Mia pulled Eli close, her eyes wide. Doc grabbed his shotgun from beside the door. Reaper with me. Kids, stay here. Don't open the door for nobody. Jake followed Doc outside, the night air sharp against his face. Somewhere in the trees, branches cracked underfoot. Then a voice called out, familiar and smug. Malone, I know you're out here. Ray. Doc chambered around. Told you wouldn't like my idea. Jake cracked his knuckles. What idea? Doc grinned, all teeth. We let him find us. The reckoning. Ray's voice slithered through the trees, closer now. Come on out, Marine. Let's talk man to man. Jake crouched beside Doc behind a fallen log, his injured arm throbbing in time with his pulse. Moonlight filtered through the branches, painting the forest in jagged silver shadows. Somewhere to their left, a twig snapped. Doc mouthed a single word, flanking. Jake nodded. Ray wasn't alone. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping over the underbrush. Jake held his breath as it passed inches above their hiding spot. Doc tapped Jake's shoulder, then pointed 2 fingers toward the light source. I'll circle around. Jake gripped Doc's arm before he could move. No kills. Doc's teeth flashed in the dark. No promises. Then he was gone, melting into the forest with unsettling silence. Ray's voice came again, closer still. I just want the kids, Malone. Hell, keep the boy if he's really yours. But the other 2 belong to me. Bile rose in Jake's throat. Belong. Like they were property. Like they weren't human. Another flashlight flickered to life. This one near the cabin. Jake's stomach dropped. They were surrounding it. He had to move. Staying low, Jake crept toward the second light. The forest floor was a minefield of dry leaves and snapping twigs, but a man's own footsteps covered his advance. The flashlight beam illuminated a hulking figure, one of Ray's enforcers, judging by the shotgun cradled in his meaty hands. The man paused near a birch tree, scanning the darkness. Jake picked up a stone and hurled it into the bushes beyond the man. As expected, the enforcer turned toward the noise, raising his shotgun. Jake struck. 3 swift steps, and he was on the man's back, an arm locked around his throat. The enforcer bucked like a wild horse, but Jake held tight, squeezing until the man's struggles weakened. When he went limp, Jake lowered him quietly to the ground and relieved him of his weapon. A scream tore through the night from the direction Doc had gone. Not Doc's voice. Jake snatched up the flashlight and ran toward the sound, the stolen shotgun heavy in his hands. He found Doc standing over a writhing figure, one of Ray's men clutching his knee, which was bent at an unnatural angle. Doc pressed a boot to the man's throat, silencing his whimpers. One left, Doc murmured. Ray. A gunshot shattered the silence. Both men froze. The shot had come from the cabin. Jake's blood turned to ice. The kids. He sprinted, branches whipping at his face, the shotgun banging against his back. The cabin came into view, its windows glowing with lantern light. The front door stood open. Jake charged inside the chaos. Lucas stood over Ray, the pistol trembling in his hands. Ray was on his knees, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Mia had Eli pinned behind the overturned table, her arms locked around him like a vice. Sergeant the cat was perched on the stove, hissing like a miniature demon. Ray laughed through gritted teeth, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Miss my heart, kid. Guess you ain't got the stones after all. Lucas's finger tightened on the trigger. Jake stepped between them. "Lucas, don't." The boy's eyes were wild, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was going to take us. He had handcuffs. Jake kept his voice steady. "I know, but this isn't the way." Doc appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a practiced glance. He moved to the kids, checking them over with surprising gentleness. Ray spat blood onto floorboards. "You think this is over? I own this county, Malone. You're dead. The kids are mine. That's how this." Jake's fist cut him off. Ray crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. Silence settled over the cabin, broken only by Eli's quiet sniffles. Jake turned to find the boys staring at him with wide, wet eyes. "You killed him?" Jake knelt, wincing as his injured arm protested. "No, buddy, he's just sleeping." Lucas sank into a chair, the pistol clattering onto the table. His entire body shook. "What now?" Doc answered before Jake could. "Now we disappear him." Jake's head snapped up. "We're not killing him." "Didn't say kill." Doc grinned. "But up near the state line, there's an old mine shaft. Deep, dark, and the only person who knows the location is standing in this room." Understanding dawned. Jake looked at Ray's unconscious form, then at the kids, at Lucas's hollow stare, Mia's protective grip on Eli, the boy's tear-streaked face. Justice or mercy? In the end, the choice was easy. Jake grabbed Ray's ankles. "Let's take out the trash." Homecoming. The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft pastels as Jake guided Doc's truck down the winding mountain road. In the back seat, the kids slept in a tangle of limbs. Eli curled against Mia. Lucas slumped against the window with Sergeant purring in his lap. Doc rode shotgun, his shotgun resting between his knees. "You sure about this?" Jake kept his eyes on the road. "No, but it was the only choice." The mine shaft had bought them time, not freedom. Ray's disappearance would raise questions, and Jake refused to let the kids spend their lives looking over their shoulders. They crossed the state line as the sun crested the hills. No sirens, no roadblocks, just open highways stretching toward a new beginning. The safe house was an unremarkable ranch-style home, surrounded by acres of empty land. A man waited on the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, with familiar stance that made Jake's throat tighten. Colonel James Hawkins, retired, the man who'd trained Jake in boot camp, who'd written letters to David's widow when no one else bothered. Hawk stood as the truck rolled to a stop. His sharp eyes took in everything. The kid stirring in the back seat, Jake's bandaged arm, Doc's grim expression. "Well," Hawk rumbled, "you all look like hell." Eli blinked awake, taking the new surroundings with sleepy curiosity. When his gaze landed on Hawk, he frowned. "You're old." Hawk burst out laughing. "And you're tiny. Guess we're even." The ice broken, Hawk ushered them inside where the smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. A woman with silver-streaked hair stood at the stove, Hawk's wife, Eleanor. She took one look at the bedraggled group and immediately started piling food onto plates. Over breakfast, the plan unfolded. Hawk had contacts, people who could make paperwork disappear, identities transform. By the time the eggs were gone, Lucas, Mia, and Eli had new birth certificates and a trail of foster care records leading nowhere. Jake pushed his plate away. "And me?" Hawk's expression turned serious. "You're a ghost, son." Officially, Jake Malone died in a car wreck 2 states over. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "But I hear this guy's looking to adopt 3 kids. Jake opened the envelope to find a driver's license with his photo beside a new name. His hand shook. Mia peeked over his shoulder. "Thomas Carter? That's a terrible name." Eli giggled. "I like it." Lucas was uncharacteristically quiet. When Jake met his gaze, the boy's usual defiance was gone, replaced by something fragile. "This mean you're stuck with us?" Jake thought of David's last words, of roadside diners and drafty cabins, of the battle-scarred cat and 3 kids who'd carve a place in his heart he hadn't known was empty. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "Guess it does." 6 months later, the Carter family stood on the porch of a small house in Oregon, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in fiery hues. Lucas had started school for the first time in years. Mia had a bedroom painted her favorite shade of blue. Eli had a kitten, Sergeant's unexpected offspring, that followed him everywhere. And Jake? He had a home, a real one. As the kids raced inside to argue over dinner choices, Jake lingered on the porch, breathing in the salt-tinged air. Somewhere out there, Ray might still be screaming into the darkness. The past might still be chasing them. But today, in this moment, they were safe. They were family, and that was enough. This story proves that family isn't always about blood. It's about who stand by you when the world falls apart. If this journey moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of courage and redemption. Share in the comments, what would you have done in Jake's place? Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an inspiring story.